Had terrible fights with my father if I'd stayed at home, so it was missing the teenage years at home was a great thing for me. As we are all aware, we are living in strange and uncertain times. The world order has been thrown into chaos by the current Washington regime, and for Canada, this means that our economy, our status in the world, and indeed our sovereignty in our own country are under direct and immediate threat. And that threat is not coming from some distant dictator, it is coming from our neighbour, who we have considered our closest and most trustworthy ally and friend for at least 80 years. So for the first time in many decades, perhaps the first time since the creation of Canada, the strength, viability and adaptability of our political culture is the first line of defence of our national security. My contention in my two most recent books, Restoring Democracy and On Canadian Democracy, is that while Canada is not broken, it is not broken. It is not in not good enough shape to face the trials and tribulations that are coming at us. We have seen to the south of us, in the weeks since the inauguration of Donald Trump to the presidency of the United States on January 20th, how quickly even an established democracy can be dismantled. America, of course, is and always has been a flawed democracy. One joke says Americans re-elect George III every 4 years, so they are bound to get a truly mad king every now and again. But what we are seeing in Washington is much worse than that. It is a threat to the entire world order. I believe that constitutional democracies that rely on written rules for their political culture, like the United States and some others, are by their very nature much weaker than parliamentary democracies. In order to adapt to change or challenges, constitutional democracies depend on appointed judges interpreting what founding fathers wrote centuries ago. It is an inherently intellectually corrupt system, if not worse. Parliamentary democracy is stronger and more adaptable because it gives supremacy to members of the House of Commons, the elected representatives of citizens. It requires MPs to enact laws and to govern according to the demands of the moment, not on the basis of what a group of young men may have dreamed of 250 years ago. Even so, parliamentary democracy, like any machine, requires constant maintenance and upkeep to continue to function properly. But I'm afraid we have neglected our responsibility to keep checking the oil and cleaning the spark plugs. We have relied on being able to muddle through. But while the ability to muddle through can be a great Canadian virtue, it is also one of our most serious vices. I don't need to tell this audience that the story of the Canadian military is a supreme example of that. So a gift of the Trump coup in the United States is that it is forcing us to address some of those weaknesses in our system that we haven't bothered to maintain or mend for many, many years. Top of the agenda is kick-starting our economy, which has been neglected for decades by both major parties. Associated with that is ending the ridiculous barriers to trade, business and services that have existed between provinces since the creation of Canada. And flowing from both those is bringing some formal framework to federal-provincial relations, which have been a piece of chaotic ad hocery since the beginning of Canada. But that makes the point that it is also time to address all the other fractures in our political culture that we haven't tended to, one or two of them for close to a century. I wrote my first book looking at some of these problems, Restoring Democracy, in 2019, and it was published in mid-2020. The book was written to mark the 30th anniversary of the end of the Cold War. You will all remember, I'm sure, that at the time this was held to be the decisive victory for democracy as the only legitimate and sustainable form of government. The star American political scientist Francis Fukuyama famously called that period the end of history, where all the world's conflicting political ideologies have been resolved in favour of democracy. But by 2019, European and North American political life was showing signs of turning towards socially intolerant and nationalism fostered by rabble-rousing demagogues. Boris Johnson in the UK, Donald Trump in the US, Marine Le Pen in France, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Geert Wilders in Holland, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, and others in Poland, Slovakia, the eastern states of Germany, and even in Sweden, all latched on to the deep unhappiness and feelings of abandonment among significant segments of their population. Restoring Democracy looks at some of the reasons for those people's feeling of disenfranchisement and offers some suggestions for how to bring them back into the mainstream of their societies. But as I finished the manuscript in early 2020, the COVID pandemic struck. I hoped at first to be able to get away with writing a paragraph or two about the pandemic in the epilogue, but it soon became clear that COVID was having far too profound an effect on democracies to be so easily dismissed. I had to rewrite large segments of the book to incorporate what COVID had revealed about public trust in authority, how mass tourism and easy travel have created an age of pandemics, the vulnerability of the globalized economy, and the often conflicting ideas of various governments about how to respond. The conflicts raised by COVID were especially evident in Canada because of the divisions of powers and responsibilities between the federal and provincial governments. This reality led me naturally into looking more broadly into the state of the Canadian political culture and democracy, and thus into writing on Canadian democracy, which was published last June. This is quite a short book, made up of terse essays looking at 9 aspects of our democracy and offering some suggestions for reform. But the main aim of the book is to spark discussion among groups like this one, and hopefully to attract the attention of people who can begin the reform process. The book begins in Parliament, where we have allowed our Prime Minister to gather more power and patronage than in any other parliamentary democracy, or until 6 weeks ago, even the United States. Our Prime Minister and his officials control almost everything that happens in Parliament. They orchestrate question periods, influence who becomes chair or chairs of which committee, and even appoint the parliamentary officials who are meant to be answerable to the MPs. No wonder Canadians think ordinary MPs are nothing more than political hacks and trained seals. I go on to discuss the Senate and how it can be made into a useful part of the parliamentary system, which it never has been and is not now. At this point, I take a step backward to look at how Canada was put together and the distortions that have arisen from trying to construct a massive continental federation using the playbook designed to manage a unitary state, the United Kingdom, on a small island on the other side of the Atlantic. There was, of course, a step made to address this in 1982 with patriation of the Constitution, a campaign in which I took part as a representative in London of Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. But the inclusion of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the patriation package was and is a bugbear to me. I believe, and I'm far from being alone, that the Charter has done as much to underpin the supremacy of Parliament and the stature of ordinary MPs in the last 40 years as the overweening power we give to the Prime Minister. The book then turns naturally to what has happened, or more accurately not happened, since patriation, so that still, almost a century after London first asked us to take charge of our own constitutional affairs, we don't have a workable system for managing federal-provincial relations and responsibilities. I'll come back to that in a minute, and as I will the next chapter, which deals with the Canadian voting system and how it can be reformed. We are used to getting accolades that Canada is the best country in the world in which to live, and in comparison with many others, that is close to being true. But there are many areas of life in which we are falling behind, and in Chapter 8, I look at studies of Canada against the 64 standards of well-being drawn up by the United Nations. The results show we have a lot of work to do to deserve our billing. The book ends with a look at the core elements of trust between citizens and their government, and those are transparency and accountability. Again, standards have slipped and need addressing if the erosion of our democracy is to be halted and reversed. Can anyone remember the last time a minister resigned for reasons of having made a mistake or been shown to be incompetent? I can't remember the last time, yet it used to happen very frequently when I was a political reporter, and I always felt democracy was served when a minister resigned. Today, however, is a good time to look at our recent election and the events that led up to it. They are good examples of some of the serious democratic deficits in Canada. The first one, of course, is that we are terrible at getting rid of party leaders, even prime ministers, who have become deeply unpopular among caucus members and even more so across the country. This failure is partly a result of the power we give to our prime ministers, but also comes from the culture of celebrity that has overtaken the whole way in which we select and view party leaders. Our political parties are now defined much more by the brand of their leader than they are by their policies or approaches to politics. Just look at the change in the Liberal Party that happened when Mark Carney took over from Justin Trudeau. And if Pierre Poilievre doesn't manage to hold on to the Conservative leadership, the brand change will be just as dramatic there. It's worth taking a moment to remind ourselves that in the parliamentary system, the Prime Minister, the government leader, is the person who commands the confidence of the majority of members of the House of Commons. That's it. It's that simple. But what we have now is a system by which the Prime Minister and other party leaders are chosen not by fellow MPs, but by members of their parties out in the constituencies. This sounds more democratic than having party leaders chosen by the members of Parliamentary Caucus, but only 2% of Canadians belong to political parties. And the process of getting new members to vote in leadership contests is usually questionable at best and often corrupt. Our current Prime Minister was chosen before the election by just over 130,000 Liberal Party members. There were actually meant to be about 400,000 Liberal Party members at the time, so I don't know what happened to the other 270,000, but there we are. The result is that our party leaders have their own legitimacy, however questionable, and it doesn't include being beholden to the members of their caucus. The British and the Australians do the business of choosing and removing leaders much better, in my view. In the British Conservative Party, the leader can be challenged at any time if a couple of dozen MPs write to the chair of the caucus committee requesting a confidence vote. To choose a new leader, the caucus votes on candidates until only 2 candidates remain, and those 2 names are put to party members in the constituencies around the country. Australians give MPs an even tighter rein on their leaders, but as they often do, Australians have gone too far. Until recently, a vote could be taken at any time to remove a leader. It only required a majority of 1 to oust a leader, and bad polls in the Sunday newspapers could trigger that. And a couple of dozen federal and state leaders, including several prime ministers, have been removed in the last 40 years or so. I think the number, including the federal and the state level, in the last 40 years is something like 24 leaders have been removed. It may even be more than that. The last Prime Minister who was removed was Malcolm Turnbull, who I knew quite well when I covered Australia as part of my Asia beat, and bad polls in the Sunday papers and he was out by lunchtime on Monday. That doesn't happen here. These removals, which are called spills, have been so frequent and disruptive, the threshold for an ouster has been raised to 60% of the members of caucus. The Australians are now looking at a system to replace leaders that would require a successful candidate to get a majority of votes from both the party membership and the caucus. And I think that it would be very important for public confidence in our system that we will restore the authority of ordinary MPs, and adaptations of the UK and Australian ways of removing and replacing leaders could help achieve this. The Conservative Party here went some way along this road when Michael Chong's private members' reform bill of 2014, giving the party caucus members the power to remove their leader at any time. But to get a compromise would have to be made but to get this private members' bill adopted, a compromise had to be made making adherence by the parties voluntary. The Conservatives adopted the policy, and it was used to remove Erin O'Toole in 2022. But other parties did not adopt it, which is why it took crowbars and finally the dynamite of Chrystia Freeland's resignation to get Trudeau to resign. Then there's the question of our first-past-the-post voting system. Thanks. While campaigning in the 2015 election, Justin Trudeau promised that if the Liberals won, it would be the last election under the first-past-the-post system, and some form of proportional representation would be adopted. But then he won a substantial majority of seats in Parliament with only a minority of the popular vote, as it often happens here. His passion for PR, which would have given him nearly only a minority government, disappeared very quickly. A committee was set up to look at PR, and it decided very fast that there was no consensus in Canada about the issue. PR was swept under the rug where it remains. Some of the PR systems are extraordinarily complex and unattractive. It can take months for even the results of an election in Ireland to be calculated. And in some European countries with PR, it has taken a year or more for parties to negotiate a coalition big enough to form a government. Both Belgium and Spain have gone without governments for a year or more, Belgium nearly 2 years on one occasion, because no one could form a governing coalition after close elections. I should just say, political anarchists will love this, in both cases of Spain and Belgium, the economies boomed while they had no governments. What I favour is an adaptation of the first-past-the-post system that introduces ranked ballots. Voters are asked to rank the candidates in their ridings in order of preference. If no one wins a majority on the first count, voters' second choices are added, and so on, until one candidate is the clear winner with a majority vote. At the moment, only about 50% of Canadians trust our electoral system and what they produce. A result of this is very poor voter turnout in elections. Adoption of the ranked ballot system could significantly increase public confidence that our election results are a reasonable reflection of the voters' choices. And if all politicians knew they needed to be the second choice for a significant number of voters, it would deter extremist positions. One of the problems I have with proportional representation is that it tends to give power to extremist factions on both left and right. I hesitate sometimes to say this out loud, but I think one can make an argument there are 50,000 Palestinians who might be alive today if Israel had the first-past-the-post system instead of proportional representation. Because Israel is a very good example of the moment of PR giving power to extremist, nationalist, religious factions who take control of the parties. And we are seeing all over Europe, where most of the countries have PR, that extremist political parties gain undue influence because they are required to be part of governing coalitions. Voter turnout is currently around 60% in most of our federal elections, worse in provincial elections, and deplorable at the municipal level, where usually only around 20% of voters bother to show up. Only 20%. You will remember there's just been a referendum or a plebiscite in Victoria City about the future of the swimming pool. And I'm sure you will remember there was a huge amount of publicity and public debate about what should be done with this swimming pool before the plebiscite was held. I mean, that's huge. It went on for weeks. It was on the morning radio every day, in the papers every day, letters to the editor, yards of them. Yet, in that plebiscite, only 20% of registered voters in Victoria City voted on it, which is a sign of the state of municipal democracy here. In our recent federal election, which, as you remember, is billed as one of the most important in our history, only 68% of registered voters, 2/3, bothered to cast a ballot. 68 only in that last election. To give but one example of the distortion created by low voter turnout, in February, Doug Ford in Ontario won a clear majority government, but with the support of only 19.5% of registered voters. In his previous election, it was 18.4%. I think we should adopt the Australian system and require registered voters to cast a ballot on election day and fine those who don't vote. Democracy brings rights, but it also has responsibilities. I sometimes think we in Canada are not demanding enough on the responsibilities and obligations of citizenship. Finally, I want to touch on just one aspect of the Canadian political makeup highlighted by Donald Trump's mad flapping around. That's the state of the federal-provincial working relationship in Canada. Trump started his recent attacks when Ottawa was in chaos as Justin Trudeau was eased out. But it so happened that the Council of the Federation, the organisation of premiers and territorial leaders, was meeting at the time. It was the Council that stepped forward at the crucial moment when it looked as though the international markets were about to abandon Canadian stocks and shares and the Canadian dollar to remind the world that Canada has strength in depth. I never thought I'd see the day when Doug Ford found his inner John Robarts, but he did that day. In my view, we need to make the Council of the Federation a formal organisation at which federal-provincial issues are debated and where hopefully compromises can be found. Remember, we have a growing separatist movement in Alberta, in part because of an opaque federal-provincial bargaining system that has allowed all kinds of ridiculous and untrue conspiracy theories to buzz around amongst voters. We've also, I think, seen issues like immigration and certainly healthcare and indeed education as well, become something that require a national approach. And at the moment, these immigration, of course, is solely, in theory, a federal responsibility, while health and education are provincial. But these are areas now where we need a national consensus. We have a housing crisis because the provinces were not involved in immigration policy. And the federal government decided that we need vast numbers of immigrants in order to sustain the economy and future pensions for us gentlemen here. But it has played havoc with the province's ability to provide the infrastructure that was needed to accommodate these people. I mean, that was a clear example of something that should have been debated at a federal-provincial level. I suggest that the Prime Minister become a member of the Council of the Federation with the premiers and the territorial leaders, and that meetings be held annually at the very least. Some sessions might have to be held in private, but the key debates should be in public. Also, there should be associate memberships for Indigenous organisations and for Canada's largest cities. At some point, reconciliation is going to have to produce a new political relationship and fair stance for discussion between Indigenous peoples and the rest of us. A reformed Council of the Federation could be the forum where that plays out. Over 80% of Canadians now live in towns and cities, and that proportion is likely to keep rising. We are no longer a rural society, even though much of our political culture still rests on rural values, and the membership of both the House of Commons and the legislatures remains heavily weighted towards rural regions. Montreal, Toronto and Vancouver now include half or more of the population of their provinces. Same is true in Alberta if you add Edmonton and Calgary together. They are also where Canada's major social and economic challenges are most biting. But the cities and towns are also where the democratic deficit in our country is most profound, as I've said, 20% voter turnout. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts, and now I'd like to hear from your comments and your questions. Thank you, gentlemen. Yes, sir.
Triple S, how important is it that what used to be called civil affairs be taught in schools in our system? I personally have no knowledge of what the existing situation is, although I heard earlier here today that it's virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
It seemed to me that that's the first principle of any democracy, is you have to inform the young people at the age of understanding and forward. Yeah. So, to me, all of these other low-hanging fruit, like forcing votes and things like that, if we're not doing that, then it is literally a hopeless situation because we're subject to too much other influence.
You're quite right. I am blessed with teenage grandsons right across this country, so I have some views on what they're getting in the education system. My grandson here is getting a lot of civics and a lot of understanding. He's 14, and they're doing a mock legislature. I think in the next week or so. They've visited question period. They've had visits from MLAs talking to them about the workings of the legislature. So that's good here. But I've got a couple of grandsons on the other side of the country, and they got nothing.
Yeah. Is that in the public school system?
Yes. Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if I got the quote quite right, but it's basically that democracy is based on questionable assumptions, an aggregation of the ignorance of the individual, and the biggest effect of government.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. Well, I mean, that leads on from the previous question, really. We don't teach this stuff in schools the way we should. And I don't think we as I say, it's different with my grandson here. He's getting it. But I don't think we teach civic responsibilities in a broader sense, not just in politics, but civic responsibilities. I didn't say it here, but one of the great differences between parliamentary democracy and constitutional democracy is that parliamentary democracy deals with communal rights and communal responsibilities rather than the individual. And one of the beefs I've got about the inclusion of the Charter of Rights is that is a piece of constitutionalism that focuses almost entirely on individual rights and not communal rights and communal responsibilities. That's why I think it's an alien being in our political system. But you're quite right. We need to improve the education of civic responsibilities in our schools. But also I think that one of the reasons I'm in favour of it being a legal requirement to vote is that it would push people to at least taking some thought and consideration of what's happening in an election when they're faced with having to go to the polls or having to use one of the other methods of voting. It would push them into thinking about what's going on and paying attention. Yes, back there.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. I agree, I'm sure people here would agree that the Prime Minister's office is a death grip parliament. And many of us are old enough to remember when that wasn't the case. The problem, of course, is for that to change, you're asking a Prime Minister to commit suicide. So how do we do it? As Canadians, how do we diminish the power of the PMO and reset the balance so that the people who send to Parliament actually have a voice that represents us?
I've toiled with this. It's a major problem with me putting forward all this stuff and then saying, well, I don't know how we're going to do it. I think that there are a number of MPs in particular, and also MLAs at the provincial level, who, many of them I think, who are seriously concerned about this drift towards fixation on the leader that has made politics into a sort of game show. And I've had several of them contact me after reading the book, and I think that there is a beginnings of a movement to try to redress the balance. But it has to come in the political parties, basically. I think that's where the rot has to be stopped to begin with, and. I mentioned Michael Chong. I mean, he stands out as one of the members of Parliament who has done most, and very bravely as an individual, to try to push reform through Parliament to try to lessen the power of the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office. Of all, this is nothing. This is not a. No party is innocent on this stuff. But it is a problem to try and find where you stick the crowbar in the brickwork to get this moving, and it probably needs to go at several levels. I've wondered if this wouldn't just going on from the chaos that we're facing to the south, whether this isn't a moment for another. Confederation of Tomorrow conference, whether this isn't, maybe we need a citizens' assembly. We've had a few of those and they've been pretty good, they've been pretty successful. Maybe this is a time for a national citizens' assembly to address these and many other issues that I'm sure need doing. I think I would push for a citizens' assembly as a first step. To begin to address some of these things. There was one here. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
One of the questions often asked is, who cares? And so I know a lot of people who have huge amounts of schooling, and even people who work for the government, federally and provincially, who really don't know how it works, what the internal machinations are. So, and then a lot of the press, and then the so-called think tanks are extremely biased.
Yep.
So on a citizens' assembly side of the topic, is there any organization that exists that you know of that has an unbiased look that tries to educate the public on what is happening?
No, basically. Apart from me, no. But the point you raise about the complexity that is built up in our system is quite right. I mean, we have far too much government. We do, and a lot of that is not. I'm not advocating for a doge by any stretch of the imagination. But because of the opacity of our system, there's a huge amount of duplication, particularly between federal and provincial civil services, but also with municipal as well. It's almost impossible. You're quite right for any outsider and even sometimes insiders to understand how the system works. And part of the reason is that is just this muddle of multiple organizations doing the same thing. Yeah, good point. Yes, you.
Johathan, thank you. Echo the thoughts. Thanks for an excellent presentation. Elections Canada has very strict rules when people become candidates, and if they get elected, they obey the rules of Parliament. It always struck me that one of the weaknesses of our system is actually the nomination process.
Yep.
People become candidates. In many cases, we find that the candidates, and not Angus, of course, but they've been party apparatchiks for years, and they get kind of float up and they become a candidate. I mean, the whole idea is that it's a representative body that is supposed to bring in people with different views, and we've all seen examples of the famous NDP candidate who was a waitress at Carleton University and who won just because she happened to have a French name and was in Las Vegas at the time.
Right.
To others that have worked very hard to get the party nomination and had it yanked out from under them because of some decision made by some non-transparent body in Ottawa. So, and then we have the instances of alleged foreign interference in the nomination process, and truckloads of people, busloads of people being brought in. So, it strikes me that a fundamental building block is the weakness of the nomination process in terms of getting candidates. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, you've summed it up very well, Hugh. But also, I mean, this has become, some aspects of this are a function of the celebrity leadership business, where you get the nomination if you're in line with. Look at the number of candidates in the last election who were disavowed by leaders. I don't remember an election in my 60 years or so writing about this stuff. I don't remember an election where so many candidates were removed by party headquarters.
Because of social media, that's the difference.
Well, that's one reason. What you said 40 years ago comes back to haunt you. Sure, that's one reason. But also, I think it is because the leaders are not interested in having party or caucus members who are verifiable and respected members, representatives of the people who voted for them. What the leaders are looking for is trained seals who will do as they're told. And as you say, one of the results of this is that you see more and more MPs who have come up through the youth party systems. They've gone on to work for in the party head office, and then when a dependable riding falls open, they get to be parachuted in to be the candidate, and that's happening more and more frequently. And again, I think it's part of the celebrity leadership, and going back to in the case of any any government, the power of the Prime Minister's office or the legislative premier's offices. That's what we have to get away from. We have to get back, I think, or back or forward to the clear understanding that an MP or an MLA is the representative of the people who voted for them, and that's their role in the legislature or in Ottawa. I agree with you. One over here, yes, sir.
I totally agree with your recent remarks by this gentleman over here. For myself, when I left the Canadian Forces, I became avidly involved in Canadian politics. I've been an association president, things like that, for first of all the Reform Party, and on since still active with the Conservatives.
Yep.
And at the next convention, to be next year, I'd very much like to see this issue of let's call it the almost authoritarian management nominations addressed, put back in hands of our membership.
Yeah.
And I'll just conclude by saying, listen very carefully to everything you said today, and I can't find anything to disagree with.
Right. Thank you. This is the crowbar to get in the brickwork. This is where stuff has to happen. This is where reform has to begin at association level. And it will. Any more? Yes, sir.
Thank you again for an excellent presentation. At the beginning, you alluded to the circumstances south of the border.
Yeah.
I think most Canadians are incredibly concerned about the egregious decisions that the Orange Maggot has taken and is ignoring of the U.S. Constitution.
Yep.
How likely do you think that he will continue to ignore the Constitution and serve a further 4 years? And what steps might be taken to prevent that?
Yeah. I try and keep a close eye on it, and there's certainly a pushback is building in the US. There are more and more demonstrations across the country every day. Thousands upon thousands of people coming out into the streets. All the demonstrations so far have been peaceful. I keep on waiting, because I am a cynic and have been around too long, for agents provocateurs infiltrating some of these demonstrations. That wouldn't surprise me, which would then give the authorities an excuse to respond. And if that sounds like the sort of things that only happens in a banana republic, I'm afraid we are now next door to a banana republic. And what I find astonishing, and maybe this will be the thing that really propels the pushback, is the sheer corruption of this operation and the speed with which it has become nothing more than a money grab by an extended family mafia operation. I mean, it is quite extraordinary the way a mafia don and his family operation have taken over the United States and are basically cashing in on it. It is stunning, and it is also a warning to us all that we really need to keep our democratic institutions in fighting form, or we could face the same thing. It would be more difficult here because of the strengths of the parliamentary system, but we're not immune to it. We're not. But I guess everybody is looking at the midterm elections and saying, what is this going to produce? Well, I mean, if he loses the control of the Senate and the House, that's going to make life more difficult. But his program to destroy and dismantle all the other checks and balances on presidential power is proceeding with such speed and with relatively low levels of pushback at this point. He may, within, look at what he's done in 100 days. In 2 years, he could have had the whole thing basically dismantled. He could. He's militarizing all the justice system to be an arm of the president's office. I'm really very pessimistic at the moment. I really am. It is not looking good at all. And there's always in the United States, there's always the chance of political unrest becoming seriously violent. 350 million people with 400 million guns. There's always that chance in the States. It's happened before, and not just as a civil war, but as violent political unrest is very common there compared with here. So I'm watching it day by day, and I see some signs of pushback, but at the moment I remain pretty pessimistic, I'm afraid. Yes, sir.
What I want to know is your view on those one writing, I think, a couple of hundred people, independent writing.
Yeah.
Well, what's the purpose of those people?
Yeah, I can. He's saying there was one writing. I think you're thinking of Pierre Poilievre's writing in Ottawa Carleton.
I believe so.
Yeah, where there were about 200 people running. Well, I haven't looked at it very closely, but it strikes me as probably a pretty underhanded but effective way of trying to ensure that he didn't get re-elected, and it was successful. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Well, it'd be more difficult to do in Alberta, I would have thought, but they may. It's an unfortunate piece of silliness. Well, but effective, I'm afraid. Yeah, but again, if we'd had a slightly more educated electorate in that riding, and you would have thought Ottawa riding, they ought to be pretty sophisticated in their understanding of politics. I was rather amazed that happened, but there we are. There is always the possibility, of course, that the good voters of Ottawa Carleton were no longer in favour of their MP of 20 years, I guess. Yeah.
That riding is about 100 kilometres wide or something.
Yes.
It was gerrymandered last year.
Yes. Was it? Okay. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, with regard to that, if I recall correctly, Carleton, the 91 extra names
yes.
still didn't mount to a hill of beans.
No, they don't. No.
And even if it was a two-person race, all you have to split it a little bit.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
How do you, what's your view on how we would, in our system, enforce or the sort of the protocol, traditional elements of our Constitution, the ones that aren't written down, like what you mentioned, the ministers resigning and all that? Yeah. If that, my impression is that's being ignored now, they're just blazing on.
No, it is.
As if it's, can people be sued on that ground, or governments, or
how
would that be enforced?
Yeah. No, I mean, but you see, I think that this is one of the results of celebrity leadership and of making our politics into something akin to a TV game show. And we've got also, not as bad as in other places, but we've had polarization here, and we've got this sort of winner take all and winning is everything concept of politics has seeped into our culture in the last 30, 40 years. We need to get rid of that. And part of the way we do that is making the leaders of the parties, including the Prime Minister, more beholden to the other elected members of the legislature or the House of Commons, in my view. It's a cultural approach, but I think that those cultural approaches can be the most effective and should be the most effective. Yeah.
At what point do you think we should start teaching our children about politics? And is there a way of doing it without tilting it for the education system to one party or another?
Oh yeah, I think one can do it easily without making it a partisan issue. I think that's no problem at all. But essentially we start teaching kids about politics from birth, don't we? And which is why I think, as we were talking about earlier, politics should be part of education on civic and communal responsibilities. That you're part of a community, and your role in life is the part you play in that community, and being involved in politics is part of that. It's part of the broader sense of being a part of your own community and culture. So I think it can be done very easily without it getting partisan.
Well, I think that they certainly do that in the States. From the time you go to kindergarten, you're saying.
Yeah. Well, that's patriotism, which I think is a bit different from what we're talking about. I'm not particularly keen on that sort of stuff in schools, not at all. But learning and experiencing your role as a member of your community in the broader sense, I think, is something else.
That used to be taught as social studies.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, I think in that question, this is hard. Mom says no, free votes.
Yeah.
In Parliament.
Right.
When was the last? Have they ever worked well?
Yes, they have. Yeah, there's usually a free vote on private members' bill. There's usually free votes. Obviously, there are not free votes on matters of confidence, which are the throne speech and the budget. And since we've got into this, as I've said, this sort of game show, sports culture of politics, the free votes have become less and less frequent. I'll tell you just a little story, just because it's illustrative. When I worked on the patriation operation in London, you will remember that Pierre Trudeau came back from one visit to London and meeting with Margaret Thatcher, saying that she had promised him that she would put a 3-line whip on the Canada Bill. The 3-line whip in British parliamentary parlance means that her Conservative MPs would be told they had to vote for the Canada Bill as if their life depended on it. Well, no one, and I know because I not only was part of it, but I've seen all the documents subsequently. No one heard her say, including the British officials, no one heard her say that to Pierre Trudeau. We never heard her say that to Pierre Trudeau, and I don't believe for a moment she said it to Pierre Trudeau. And the reason is very simple. On constitutional issues in the British Parliament, MPs are supreme. They cannot be whipped. And we've lost some of that, and we need to regain it. It was also a time when she had been in office just for 2 or 3 years, and while she was elected with a great deal of enthusiasm because she ended many years of Labour Party rule and was putting Britain on a different direction, the reaction to her, the negative reaction, was beginning to build up amongst some of the Conservative backbenchers, and she could not have affronted them by even trying to impose the whips on that vote. So I don't believe it happened. But I think, there ought to be some issues on which MPs, ordinary MPs, your and my elected representatives, are supreme. And constitutional matters ought to be one of them. You all agree with that? Yeah. Yes, sir.
When are the press going to start reporting votes of our local MPs in newspapers so we can monitor?
Well, you can do that yourself quite easily, I think, online. And actually, I think when I was doing some of the research for this book, I found that I was really quite surprised at the CPAC audience amongst Canadians. It's really pretty high. Canadians watch CPAC. They watch the affairs of Parliament on TV, a much higher number than I had expected. So, I mean, with your expertise, you will know that a lot of this information is available online. Probably not that many people go looking to see what their MP has been up to, but now and again it becomes an issue. I know, doesn't it? And the media does report sometimes, does dig out the information, but it's not. And I never remember it being common for even local newspapers to regularly report what their MP or their MLA or the city councillors have voted personally on. Maybe they should. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Green Party.
Mm-hmm.
Don't hold that against
No.
And both Elizabeth May, who was just recently been elected, as our member of Parliament, the Sandwich and the Gulf Islands.
Right.
And MLA,
Mm-hmm.
who also has been recently elected,
Mm.
I get every week voting
from them. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sure some MPs and MLAs do give that information to their constituents, and they should. They should. Yeah. There's a saying. When I was Africa correspondent, I used to spend a lot of time in Mozambique. There was a civil war going on at the time after the departure of the Portuguese. But they had a lovely phrase, which I think I will say now. Obviously, we've run out of questions. It is a luta continua, and it means the struggle goes on. So, thank you, gentlemen, for having me.